What happens when Hollywood's most outspoken tough guy meets television's most controversial talk show host? You're about to witness one of the most explosive celebrity confrontations ever caught on live television. Mark Wahlberg, known for never backing down from a fight, found himself face-to-face with Joy Behar in what started as a routine promotional interview, but quickly spiraled into an all-out verbal warfare that left studio audiences gasping and social media exploding. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story is about to get absolutely wild. The morning started like any other at the View Studios in New York City. Mark Wahlberg had arrived early for what his publicist assured him would be a straightforward interview about his latest action thriller. He had done hundreds of these promotional appearances over the years, and The View was supposed to be one of the easier stops on his media tour. The Boston native sat in the green room, sipping his protein shake and reviewing talking points about his new movie with his team. Meanwhile, Joy Behar was preparing for the show in her usual manner, scanning through her research notes and preparing what she considered to be hard-hitting questions. Known for her sharp tongue and willingness to tackle controversial topics, Joy had built her career on being the host who wasn't afraid to ask the questions others wouldn't dare. She had heard about Wahlberg's recent comments about Hollywood politics in other interviews, and she was determined to push him on topics she felt he had been avoiding. The other co-hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Sunny Hostin, were settling into their usual dynamic as the cameras prepared to roll. They had no idea they were about to witness television history in the making. The show's producers had briefed everyone that this would be a standard celebrity interview segment, focused primarily on Wahlberg's new film and his production company's upcoming projects. As the show went live and the opening segment concluded, Joy introduced their guest with her characteristic enthusiasm, though those who knew her well could detect a subtle edge in her voice. Mark Wahlberg walked onto the stage with his typical confident swagger, waving to the audience and flashing his famous smile. He took his seat next to Joy, completely unaware that she had prepared an ambush that would change the entire trajectory of his media tour. The first few minutes proceeded exactly as expected. Joy asked about the new movie, and Mark delivered his practiced responses about the stunts, working with the director, and what audiences could expect from the high-octane thriller. The conversation flowed smoothly as Mark described the intensive training he underwent for the role and shared some behind-the-scenes stories that had the audience laughing and engaged. But Joy was just getting warmed up. She had been studying Mark's recent interviews and social media presence, looking for angles that other hosts had missed or been too polite to pursue. She noticed how he had been carefully avoiding certain political topics, and she decided that her show would be where he finally had to address the elephant in the room. "So, Mark," Joy began, her tone shifting slightly as she leaned forward in her chair, "I've been following your interviews this week, and I noticed you've been very careful about discussing your political views. Don't you think celebrities have a responsibility to use their platform to speak out about important issues?" Mark's smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Well, Joy, I've always believed that my job is to entertain people. When folks buy a ticket to see my movies or turn on their television, they want to escape from all the political noise for a couple hours. I don't think they need to hear my opinions about policy." Joy wasn't satisfied with that response. She pressed forward, her voice taking on a more confrontational tone. "But surely someone with your influence understands that silence can be interpreted as complicity. When democracy itself is under attack, don't you think it's irresponsible to just focus on making movies?" The studio audience grew noticeably quieter, sensing the tension building between the two. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, realizing this wasn't going to be the softball interview he had expected. His publicist, watching from the wings, felt her stomach drop as she recognized the setup. "Joy, I think you're making some pretty big assumptions there," Mark replied, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced as his irritation grew. "I vote, I'm involved in my community, I support causes I believe in. Just because I don't get on social media every day to lecture people doesn't mean I'm not engaged." Joy sensed she was getting under his skin and decided to push harder. "But Mark, with everything that's happening in this country, with threats to women's rights, voting rights, basic human dignity, don't you think your silence sends a message? Don't you think your fans deserve to know where you stand?" Mark's jaw tightened visibly. He had dealt with confrontational interviewers before. But there was something particularly grating about Joy's approach. She wasn't just asking questions, she was making accusations and demanding that he justify his personal choices on live television. "You know what, Joy," Mark said, his voice rising slightly. "I think there's a difference between being a responsible citizen and being a political activist. I don't recall signing up to be anyone's moral compass when I decided to become an actor. My job is to show up on set, do good work, and hopefully make movies that people enjoy." The other co-hosts exchanged glances, unsure whether to jump in or let the confrontation continue. Whoopi Goldberg, experienced in handling volatile situations, was clearly considering how to de-escalate. But Joy was just getting started. "That's a very privileged position to take," Joy shot back, her voice dripping with condescension. "It must be nice to be able to just ignore everything that's happening around you. But for those of us who care about the future of this country, that kind of apathy is exactly what got us into this mess." Mark's hands clenched into fists on his lap, though he managed to keep them out of camera view. The accusation that he was apathetic struck a particular nerve. He had grown up in a working-class family in Boston, had seen real struggle, real hardship, and had worked his way up from nothing to become one of Hollywood's biggest stars. "Apathy?" Mark repeated, his voice getting louder. "Lady, you don't know the first thing about me, or what I care about. I employ hundreds of people. I've donated millions to charity. I work with at-risk youth in my hometown. But apparently because I don't tweet about politics every 5 minutes, I'm the problem with America?" Joy leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk, clearly pleased that she had gotten such a strong reaction. "I'm just saying that with great power comes great responsibility, and maybe it's time for you to use yours." The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that this interview had crossed a line from which there might be no return. Mark Wahlberg, the man who had built his reputation on being authentic and unfiltered, was about to show America exactly what that looked like when pushed too far. Mark's eyes flashed with an intensity that anyone who had watched his movies would recognize. This wasn't acting, this was pure, unfiltered Mark Wahlberg, about to defend himself against what he clearly saw as an unfair attack on his character and values. "You know what, Joy," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with barely contained anger. "I think I've heard enough of your lecture. You want to talk about responsibility? Let's talk about the responsibility of journalists who actually do their homework before they start throwing around accusations." Joy's smirk wavered slightly, but she wasn't backing down. "I think I've done my homework just fine, Mark. I've seen the interviews where you dodge every political question, where you refuse to take a stand on issues that affect millions of Americans." "Dodge questions?" Mark leaned forward, his voice rising. "Or maybe I just think there's more to life than turning every conversation into a political debate. Maybe I think people are smart enough to make up their own minds without Hollywood actors telling them what to think." The other co-hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes tried to interject with a light comment about getting back to the movie, but Joy waved her off dismissively, clearly determined to continue her confrontation with their guest. "That's a convenient excuse," Joy pressed on. "But when you have a platform like yours, staying neutral is actually taking a side. It's taking the side of the status quo, the side of those in power." Mark's laugh was sharp and bitter. "The status quo? Joy, do you know where I come from? I grew up in Dorchester, one of 9 kids in a family that struggled to put food on the table. My mother worked multiple jobs just to keep us housed. Don't you dare sit there in your comfortable studio and lecture me about privilege and the status quo." "But that's exactly my point," Joy shot back, seemingly oblivious to the growing anger in Mark's voice. "You've made it. You've succeeded beyond most people's wildest dreams, and now you have a responsibility to speak up for those who don't have a voice." "I do speak up," Mark said, his Boston accent now thick with emotion. "I speak up with my actions. I create jobs. I give back to my community. I mentor kids who are going through the same struggles I went through. But apparently that doesn't count because I don't perform my politics for the cameras like some kind of trained SEAL." Joy's expression hardened. "Performing politics? Is that what you call caring about democracy, about human rights, about the future of this country? Maybe that attitude is exactly what's wrong with celebrities today." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Camera operators were getting tighter shots, sensing that they were capturing something extraordinary. The audience sat in stunned silence, many with their phones out, already recording what they knew would become a viral moment. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You know what, Joy? I came here to talk about my movie, to have a conversation with people I thought were professionals. Instead, I'm getting ambushed by someone who thinks she has the right to judge how I live my life and spend my money." "Nobody's ambushing you," Joy said, though her tone suggested she was enjoying every moment of Mark's discomfort. "I'm asking legitimate questions that any serious journalist would ask." "Legitimate questions?" Mark's voice cracked with incredulity. "You're not asking questions. You're making statements. You've already decided I'm guilty of whatever crime you think I've committed by not being political enough for your taste." Whoopi Goldberg finally tried to step in, her voice calm but firm. "Mark, Joy, let's all take a breath here and—" "No, Whoopi," Mark interrupted, his eyes never leaving Joy's face. "I want to hear more from Joy about how I'm supposed to live my life. Apparently, making movies, creating jobs, supporting charities, and raising my family isn't enough. I need to pass some kind of political purity test to earn her approval." Joy leaned back in her chair, clearly relishing the confrontation she had created. "I'm not asking for my approval, Mark. I'm asking you to use your influence responsibly. Is that really so unreasonable?" "What's unreasonable?" Mark said, his voice getting dangerously quiet. "Is sitting here listening to someone who makes a living, stirring up controversy, tell me how to be a responsible human being. What's unreasonable is being lectured about privilege by someone who's never had to worry about where her next meal was coming from." The studio fell completely silent, except for the hum of the cameras. Joy's face flushed red, realizing that Mark had just turned her own tactics against her. But she wasn't ready to concede defeat. "That's a personal attack, Mark, and it's uncalled for," Joy said, trying to regain control of the conversation. "We're talking about your public responsibilities, not my personal life." "My public responsibilities?" Mark laughed bitterly. "Lady, my public responsibility is to make good movies and treat people with respect. Your public responsibility is supposed to be asking fair questions and having honest conversations. Guess which one of us is failing at their job right now?" Sarah Haynes made another attempt to lighten the mood. "Maybe we can talk about the stunts in the new movie, Mark. I heard you did most of them yourself." But Joy wasn't finished. "I think our viewers deserve to know where you stand on the issues that affect their daily lives, Mark. That's not an ambush. That's journalism." Mark's patience finally snapped completely. "Journalism? Is that what you call this hit job? You invite me on your show under false pretenses, then spend the entire time trying to bait me into saying something you can use against me later. That's not journalism, Joy, that's tabloid garbage." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Joy's face went from red to purple, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking under the direct assault on her professional integrity. "How dare you?" Joy said, her voice shaking with rage. "I've been doing this job for decades. I don't need some Hollywood pretty boy telling me what journalism is." "Hollywood pretty boy?" Mark repeated, his voice incredulous. "Now we're really getting to the truth, aren't we? This isn't about politics or responsibility. This is about you trying to tear down someone you've already decided you don't like." The other co-hosts were now openly trying to signal the producers to go to commercial break, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing every explosive moment of what had become the most dramatic confrontation in The View's history. "I don't have anything personal against you, Mark," Joy said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I just think celebrities need to do better, need to be more engaged with the world around them. And I think talk show hosts need to do better too," Mark fired back. "Maybe start by treating your guests with basic respect, instead of setting up ambushes designed to make yourself look smart." Joy's mask finally slipped completely. "If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Maybe you should stick to movies where you can just read someone else's words." The insult hit its mark, and Mark's expression shifted from anger to something much more dangerous. The man who had built his career on authentic performances was about to give the most authentic performance of his life, and it was clear that Joy Behar had pushed him past the point of no return. Mark's face transformed completely, and for a moment, everyone in the studio could see the street fighter from Dorchester that existed underneath the Hollywood polish. Joy had just made the fatal mistake of attacking not just his politics, but his craft, his livelihood, and his intelligence. "Read someone else's words?" Mark repeated slowly, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried more weight than all his previous shouting. "Joy, let me tell you something about reading other people's words. I've been reading scripts for 30 years, and I can spot bad writing from a mile away. And what you just did? That wasn't journalism. That wasn't even good television. That was just a bitter person taking shots, because she knows she's lost the argument." The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras whirring as they captured every nuance of Mark's controlled fury. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Mark wasn't finished. "You want to know about tough questions? I've been asked tough questions by real journalists, people who actually care about getting to the truth instead of just scoring points. But you're not interested in my answers. You made up your mind about me before I even sat down, and every question you've asked has been designed to confirm what you already decided was true." Joy's composure was completely gone now, her professional mask replaced by genuine anger and embarrassment. "I don't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who thinks being famous makes him above criticism." Above criticism? Mark's laugh was harsh and cutting. "Lady, I've been criticized by everyone from movie critics to my own mother. The difference is, they were honest about it. They didn't pretend to be doing journalism while they were taking their shots." Whoopi made one last desperate attempt to salvage the segment. "Let's all just take a step back here and—" "No, Whoopi," Mark said, his eyes still locked on Joy. "I want to finish this conversation that Joy was so eager to start. You want to talk about responsibility? Let's talk about your responsibility to your viewers. Do they know that you invited me here just to ambush me? Do they know that you had no intention of actually discussing my movie or anything else I'm working on?" Joy's face was now bright red with fury and humiliation. "I asked you legitimate questions about your role as a public figure. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you should reconsider being in the public eye." Mark nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting exactly that response. And there it is. The real Joy Behar, everyone. Not the tough journalist asking the hard questions, but someone who thinks she gets to decide who deserves to be in the public eye based on whether they agree with her politics. The camera caught Joy's expression perfectly as Mark's words hit home. She realized too late that she had been outmaneuvered by someone she had clearly underestimated. "You know what the really sad part is, Joy?" Mark continued, his voice now calm and measured, which made his words even more devastating. "You actually had a chance to have a real conversation here. You could have asked me about the kids I mentor in Boston, about the businesses I've helped start that employ real people, about the charities I support that actually make a difference in people's lives. Instead, you chose to turn this into some kind of political theater, because that's easier than doing actual research." Joy tried one last time to regain control. "I think our viewers can see what's really happening here, Mark. They can see someone who can't handle being challenged on his beliefs and his responsibilities." Mark stood up again, this time clearly preparing to leave. "Your viewers can see exactly what's happening here, Joy. They can see someone who came here in good faith, getting ambushed by a host who cares more about creating viral moments than having honest conversations." The other co-hosts were now openly panicking, realizing that their biggest guest of the week was about to walk off their set on live television. Sarah Haynes made one final attempt at damage control. "Mark, we'd really love to hear about the new movie if you'd like to stay," and Mark turned to Sarah with a slight smile, the first genuine warmth he had shown since the confrontation began. "Sarah, I appreciate that. I really do. And to you, Whoopi, Sunny, and Alyssa, I'm sorry you had to sit through this. You deserve better than watching your co-host turn what should have been a fun interview into an ambush." Then he turned back to Joy, and his expression hardened again. "But I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is normal. I'm not going to smile and act like it's okay for you to attack my character just because you disagree with my decision to keep my politics private." Joy made one last desperate attempt to justify her behavior. "All I did was ask you to explain your silence on important issues. If that threatens you, maybe you should ask yourself why." Mark shook his head, and for the first time, he looked almost sad rather than angry. "Joy? You didn't ask me to explain anything. You accused me of being complicit, of being privileged, of being apathetic. You decided I was guilty, and then demanded I prove my innocence. That's not journalism. That's a witch hunt." He began walking toward the exit, his microphone still live, capturing every word. And you know what the really tragic part is? You're so focused on scoring political points that you miss the real story. You miss the chance to talk about how entertainment can bring people together instead of driving them apart. You miss the opportunity to actually connect with someone instead of just tearing them down. Joy, realizing she was losing control of the narrative completely, made one final, desperate attack. Walk away, Mark. That's what people like you always do when faced with real accountability. Mark stopped dead in his tracks and slowly turned around. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing an expression that was equal parts disappointment and disgust. People like me? He repeated quietly. You mean people who grew up poor, worked their way up from nothing, employ hundreds of people, give millions to charity, and still show up to do interviews even when they know they might get ambushed by hosts with personal agendas? He took a step closer to the panel, and his voice carried the weight of genuine hurt behind the anger. Or do you mean people who don't perform their politics for your entertainment? Because if that's the crime I'm guilty of, Joy, then I'll wear that badge with pride. Mark turned and walked off the set without another word, leaving behind a stunned studio audience and a panel of co-hosts who looked like they had just witnessed a car accident. Joy sat in her chair, her face a mixture of defiance and shock, clearly trying to process what had just happened. The cameras followed Mark as he disappeared into the wings, where his publicist and team were waiting with expressions of horror and admiration. He had just delivered one of the most devastating takedowns in daytime television history, and everyone knew it. As the show cut to commercial break, viewers at home were already reaching for their phones, sharing clips and reactions across social media. The confrontation between Mark Wahlberg and Joy Behar had become an instant classic, a perfect example of what happens when manufactured controversy meets authentic outrage. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Do you think Mark was justified in walking off? Or should he have stayed and continued the debate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Because in Hollywood, the drama never stops, and neither do we.